Huddled together in a former high school cafeteria, barely feeling the warmth from the twin burn barrels vented out a hole in the roof. The adults in the room glanced with side-eyed disapproval at Violet sipping her coffee. She held back an eye roll. Her mother taught her to curate emotional displays. A furtive smile, a hint of impending tears, had more power coming from a stoic little soldier. Also, her inner critique of adult hypocrisy was more satisfying. We're sitting in the corpse of a school. We buried a pile of bones we carried from this very room. Everyone here has killed innocent people, but your uncrossable moral line is my coffee. Oh heavens, she's sipping the devil's brew without so much as cream or sugar. Is civilization gone forever? Never mind, I'm the best shot in the unit. We wouldn't even have this place if I hadn't. The long table interrupted her with a dramatic wobble of its sawhorse legs. Corporal Koenig was making an awkward effort to squeeze in for the colonel's briefing. Violet rescued her bitter black spoils of war. The coffee was a treat, brewed from a stash she'd found hidden in the principal's office. The school probably stretched its budget via a little black market dealing, but now it was hers by right of salvage. She kept her mug in her lap in case there was further jostling. Teachers are sentinels, too, glowed in red block letters on its white glaze. Serendipity gave it to her the day she found the coffee. The mug waited for her on a teacher's desk, wonderfully intact, in a classroom with tattered astronomy posters and no window unbroken. She bit the inside of her cheek a little, just a small satisfying pain, as Sergeant Tam brought the room to order. The colonel took to the battered school podium. She knew the news already. She'd delivered it. The soldiers around her seemed to hunch lower as their commanding officer spoke, like the words were a physical burden. He declared, almost apologetically, that the enemy had loosed a sentinel in the war. There were treaties, agreements, and international laws, enough to fill a room prohibiting sentinels, villains, and anyone else with powers from the battlefield. There were codes of honor, long-standing traditions, and some sort of persistent human decency that survived even in war, keeping the official ban a reality. Even the covert agencies, their rules nearly intangible, would never admit to the inclusion of sentinels in warfare. Her unit, including the colonel, considered the unprecedented breach of the rules of war to be a crime of pure evil. Violet didn't share their outrage. The first time her sergeant mentioned that war had rules, she'd laughed out loud. She was expecting him to laugh too. After an awkward silence, he gave her a disappointed scowl and a curt, "Of course there are rules." Sometimes when she couldn't sleep, she'd silently argue her point. I'm 10, and the enemy wants to kill me. Why wouldn't I kill them any way I can? If I use mustard gas, are they extra dead? If someone shoots them with laser vision, are they deader than with bombs and bullets? The rules are made up by people who aren't even fighting. It was the most blatantly asinine concept she'd ever heard of, and yet the whole unit shared the delusion, at least a little. When the colonel opened the room to questions, her comrades launched into an onslaught of pointless whining. She'd come prepared. With her coffee held tight between her thighs, she pulled a rolled magazine from inside her coat sleeve. Beneath the table, she flipped to an article she'd read at least 20 times. It was all about Excelsior City. The pictures seemed impossible. A glass tower, every color there was and rimmed in neon. Who knew how tall? How did it not shatter in the wind? Most buildings in her life were concrete or brick, if they stood at all. Whatever colors they'd been before the war, she doubted they were anything like Excelsior's. But it was the sentinels, not the buildings, that kept her coming back to the pages. Vegas had gambling, Dubai had wealth, and Excelsior had sentinels. Exactly when the first sentinel appeared remained a point of scholarly contention Violet didn't care about. What mattered was that in the mid-1800s, starting in the American West and India, people started getting impossible powers. Some of those blessed chose to help others. The newspapers of the time liked to call them heroes. During World War II, a small group of powered citizens trounced an invading interdimensional hive mind army. Violet had forgotten the name of that particular hive mind. There had been a few, but this one struck knowing most soldiers were overseas. It was expecting an easy win until it discovered just how fierce powered civilians could be when their families and homes were threatened. The Excelsior Daily's headline the next day was, "Sentinels Victorious." The name stuck. Not all powered people were as laudable as the Sentinels. Quite a few robbed people and threw their weight around. Some were as horrible as the worst she'd seen in the war. The papers called them villains at first. It still waxed and waned in popularity. Adversary, rogue, and powered criminal had all seen print. Nothing stuck to them like Sentinel. Still, no matter what they were called, from what she could see, the Sentinels made it their business to keep them in line. Violet, the 10-year-old legendary marksman, master thief, and pretty damn good hunter, suspected she had more in common with Sentinels than she did with other soldiers. She was an outsider who protected her unit with her superior abilities, the way Sentinels protected their cities. And a lot of Sentinels were women, 68% according to the article. It felt good to have a kinship like that with people far away. Having someplace besides the war to belong made the day feel lighter sometimes. As strong as it sometimes felt, though, Sentinels presented some confounding puzzles. When she hit one, she put all she had into solving it. She couldn't have the Sentinels turn out as dumb as believing in war rules. She'd spent weeks working to make sense of their costumes, blazing with color and impracticality. How did they wear them without the enemies blowing them out of the sky? It was an obvious question, and she couldn't find a single rational answer. It took Sergeant Tam suggesting that in Excelsior City, flamboyance was practically camouflage to make it make sense. She'd since been keeping a small sketchbook of outfit ideas, should she ever get to Excelsior herself. This magazine dropped another puzzle in her lap. The article was long and informative, with quotes from various Sentinels blown up in italics and set off in gray boxes. One explicitly stated, "We must work toward a fair society." This was an adult magazine. Why would they be talking about kid nonsense she'd grown out of by 4? Her mother had made it very clear not to expect fairness in anything, and her experience so far had backed that up. It was just one Sentinel, though. The Blue Hammer was his name, but she'd never heard of him. He was blue, but he had no obvious hammer. Maybe he was simple. Some powers left people dumb, or maybe it was a quote from when he was talking to kids. The colonel droned on about the enemy Sentinel. Having experienced this evil violation of the rules of war herself, she felt even more certain that any such rules were a mass delusion. She'd been there. Everyone lived, even if she was the only one who walked away. Not many battles ended like that. She'd been playing the rabbit in a regular old wounded rabbit op, which was irritating. The rabbit was a kid's job, and she was not a kid. Not really. It was true, technically, her unit could have sent her to an orphanage, but that would have been stupid. Everyone knew she was a good soldier, and they needed every good soldier they could get. Violet nearly scowled as she mentally lectured everyone on her credentials. You all had jobs and lives before the war. I was born a soldier. They attacked the hospital while my mom was in labor. You know the story. She sweat, growled, cursed, and pushed her daughter into the world, a .45 in her grip the whole time. 3 soldiers burst in as she put her baby to breast. Before they got off a shot, she'd ended them all. 3 perfect shots. So don't tell me I have to be the rabbit when I'm a better shot than any of you. She promised herself the lecture would be given out loud the next time. Still, when the Sentinel struck, she'd been the rabbit. She'd stood in the road as the enemy convoy rounded a bend. Stoic, well-dressed in civilian clothes, and covered in the blood of chickens eaten the night before. Everyone in the convoy knew it was probably a trap, but they had to stop. She might have been a bomb, so they couldn't risk approaching her. In the few seconds of confusion that followed, she began her pitch. Speaking calmly, showing her open hands, she focused on convincing herself that, while this all looked like a trap, it simply wasn't. If she believed it, they would at least entertain the possibility. She was a good talker. There'd been an IED up the road, she explained. A soldier, one of theirs, had hit it. She tried to help him, then heard the convoy. There were more IEDs. As she finished her performance, a soldier stepped off the truck. He walked toward her with the sloppy posture of a teenager who wanted to be someplace else, chewing something brown with a slack, smacking mouthful of stained teeth. She thought of a cow. He pointed his rifle at her left eye. Another soldier stepped off the truck, and whispered radio discussions ensued. Violet said nothing. Finally, a group of 5 made their way out of the trucks further back, looking like they'd head down the road on foot to investigate her story. The one with the rifle trained on her continued his sloppy rumination, but remained posed to shoot. That wasn't a problem. She'd wait for the bird call from her sighter, then drop flat. The squad snipers would kill the soldiers on the road, then shoot the driver, creating a roadblock. They'd take their time with the rest, but she'd be clear. Before any bird call came, a warm breeze swept past her face, and everything went to hell. Violet's squad carried AK-47s and a few grenades. The Sentinel had a scarf. It was a striking, almost metaphysically iridescent accessory, but no one would think of it as relevant to combat. She flashed between the squad members a spectacular savage rainbow, leaving bloody splashes and liberated teeth in her wake. She wasn't quite a speedster like the mythical Lady Lightning of the Wild West or Photon, but she had speed on her side. Also, she was agile, putting any cat to shame, and much stronger than a bear. Even with her extraordinary advantage, the Sentinel killed no one, though Violet knew Sentinels rarely did. She tried to imagine life without ever killing anyone. Even in some distant future, when she'd made her way to Excelsior City, she couldn't picture never having to kill at least the occasional mugger or burglar. She was regular people. Regular people had to kill, or their enemies would come back and kill them. Sentinels had the privilege of refusing to kill. They could, instead, leave an entire squad broken beyond repair. When the Sentinel finished, Violet's comrades lay silent but breathing. They weren't soldiers anymore, and never would be again. She looked for the kinetic blur of color that ruined them, and saw only the enemies surrounding her. One of them lit a cigarette. The soldier with the gun held on her had a lazy, almost sleepy expression, his weapon steady in his hands. He'd stopped chewing. She looked into the little black hole at the tip of his rifle, knowing the bullet would come whenever he worked up the energy to pull the trigger. Then the Sentinel was between them. It was the only time she saw her clearly. Her extraordinary scarf floated gently on the breeze created by her sudden appearance. The pristine white silhouette of her form became almost two-dimensional in its faceless brilliance as she stood between Violet and her imminent casual murder. She smelled wonderful, earthy and safe, like autumn with her. And without making the choice to, Violet ran like hell. No shots followed. The Sentinel didn't pursue. No one even called out. The child soldier was a lone survivor. She was supposed to run back to her unit and share her story, and more importantly, her fear, which she did, though she told the colonel she hadn't been afraid. As the briefing wound up, Violet stowed her magazine. The colonel, having worked himself into a state of red-faced indignation, said they were gathering intelligence, gave a string of orders including increased guard duties and sidearms at all times, and reiterated his stance on enemies' crossing of moral lines. That night, laying in her cot and watching a spider meander the ceiling, Violet still didn't care about any rules of war, but she was furious. Something in that Sentinel just made her want to, what? Shoot her? No. It wasn't about killing. Killing was for survival. This woman needed slapping. A hard slap. The hardest she could do and then some. She reached out, stretching a finger toward the ceiling. The tiny crunch the spider would make if she could crush it was almost real. Was this how it felt to be the Sentinel looking at her? She left everyone breathing because she could. She didn't even have to be in this war, but here she was with all that power. It was infuriating in more ways than she could keep track of. But her mother always said anger made people careless, and careless people didn't live long. She was right about that. She'd watched the rule prove itself at least a half a dozen times. She brought her hand down from its impossible mission of arachnicide. With her arms folded across her chest, she breathed in through her nose for an 8 count and out through her mouth for 4, just as her mother had taught her to when she felt at risk of being overwhelmed. When she let the final breath go, she waited a while. Then, eyes closed, she tucked her bottom lip between her teeth and slowly bit down.